All right, well, welcome to the Expanded Student Access Grant Request for Grant Application 2022. It's another year of presenting this very long RFGA PowerPoint presentation. We're excited to be here. We're excited to see all of you. And we just wanted to let you know that, again, this meeting will be recorded. The recording will be posted, or we will send, because this isn't posted, we'll send you the recording if you need that. And then we just want to encourage you to ask questions along the way. It's helpful if you could raise your hand, just so that we know that you want to ask a question. So if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand. We found that is kind of the best way to do things, because then we can answer questions related to what we're discussing at the time. And then there will be a little bit of time afterwards to ask questions. Also, this Zoom will record the questions and all of the chat. So we will have some moderators answering your questions via chat if you would prefer to ask a question that way. And that will all be recorded and sent to you as well. So you'll have that record as well. So let's do a quick intro. So we'll start with the Department of Workforce Services. My name is Emma March, and I've worked with this initiative for a long time now. I think this is like coming up to my 5.5 years. And I think most of you know, because you're returning grantees. So I will move it over to Kimber now.
Hey, good morning. It's good to see you all. I might be a little bit of a newer face for some of you. I've been with the Department of Workforce Services for coming on 17 years, but this is actually my first year as a contract analyst. I took over for April Gardner, so some of you may have worked with her. So I will be the contract analyst helping Emma with this grant. So it's good to see you all. Let's go to Joe.
I'm Joe Admin. I'm a fiscal grant manager for DWS. I've done childcare for a number of years, and I'm transitioning to something new, and I'm training Keisha Calloway, who will be the new fiscal grant manager over this, and let's go to her for introductions.
Hi, I'm Keisha Calloway, and like Joe said, I am taking over childcare for him, and he is the one training me.
Okay, and I think we'll transition to the Utah State Board of Education.
My name is Jessica Mackley. I'm a preschool specialist at USBE, and I have been working with the school readiness grants for 4 years.
And I'm Jared Lisenby, also a preschool specialist at Utah State Board of Education, and I've been working with these grants for 1.5 years now.
And excuse me, I'm Chelsea Oakes, and I am also a preschool specialist at USBE. I primarily work with the Becoming High Quality grant, but I'm also here to support ESA. And I've been here exactly 1 year today.
Yay, we're so glad Chelsea's been here for a year. That seems crazy. I'm Samantha Mafua. I'm from the Children's Center, Utah. I'm the lead school readiness mentor coach. So I coached the coaches who coach your teachers. And I think it's been going on is this going on my 4th year? I don't remember, whatever. It's been a long time. It's, time flies when you're having fun, right? And I primarily work with expanded student access coaches. And then Paul is next.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Paul Mueller. I'm also a mentor school readiness coach. I'm working with Samantha at the Children's Center, and I mostly work with the coaches on the Becoming High Quality grant, but I'm here to support. So good to see everybody.
All right, thank you. Okay, so just as an update, the contract period will be July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2024. That's for a 2-year award. And then for a 3-year award, it will be through to June 30th, 2025. We'll talk a little bit more about that. In the RFGA, we talk about thresholds. So those that are scoring higher up in that higher threshold, they would be awarded for a 3-year and versus a 2-year. And this is to basically paper off applications so that on our end as well, we are working, we're not having everybody having to apply every 3 years at the same time. We will be open for solicitation every year if we have funding available. So if another program decides they would like to apply, we would open that up every year. So it's not closed for 2 years or 3 years. So the application deadline is Tuesday, April 19th, 2022 at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Just, we say this every year, and we know that you're all incredibly busy, but really try to have this in a couple of days early or a few days early. Jessica mentioned last time in the Becoming High Quality Pre-Bidders meeting to put the deadline in your calendars as, you know, potentially 2 to 4 days earlier, just so you can get that into us. The great way of, the reason to have it into us earlier is that if we're seeing anything missing, we can reach out to you and tell you that there are missing components. If we're getting those applications in on the day of, we are incredibly busy on our end, like pulling in that information and making sure that we've pulled everything in and answering questions, potentially troubleshooting with technology with people. Maybe their computer shuts down or it does a reset right before they're supposed to submit. So be cognizant of that date and try to submit early, because if you're missing anything, we can reach out and say, hey, we typically have a list on our end and check things off as applications and supporting documents come in. We check everything off, and if we see something's missing, we can actually reach out to you and say, hey, we have everything, but we're missing this. Or we have everything and we're missing these two components. Please submit those things. Anything past 5 o'clock, we just can't take, just in order to be fair to everyone. So try to have them in early if possible. And then our Q&A period lasts through to Thursday, April 14th, 2022, 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. So just be aware that this is kind of the last day where you can ask those questions, and we will be answering those. So in terms of questions for the application, this is also a great resource for everybody to look at. We've done it in the past where you can go on up till that last day and review all of the questions that have come in. Even if you know, you ask a question and that's been answered, it might be good to just go through those Q&A documents and just make sure that there isn't something in there that might help you with your application phase. So just take a look at that on the 14th, or maybe take a look on the 15th and 16th when we've finalized that document, and see if there's anything else that might be helpful for this application phase. The application web form can be found here. So I'm going to pull, oh, actually, Chelsea, would you mind on your end just pulling the Adobe Sign form, just so that everybody can visually see that on your end? Thank you. And if you just press continue. So this is Appendix 1. This is going to ask your organization, the business, any executive director or equivalents, grant administrator. So this is nice to have if you have a different financial administrator, just because on our end we can put that into our records, and if we do have questions, we can reach out to that person as well as CC the grant administrator or the director. I know there's maybe a couple that are currently on the grant that emails go directly out to their superintendent. And so it's nice to have this information on here, because then we can also communicate with the director, because sometimes that communication doesn't get back with the director. So be aware of that. And then if you scroll down just a little bit, Chelsea, these are all of your, and Kimber, you can chime in if you feel like you need to, but these are all of the attachments that you will be attaching your supporting documents to. One way in which we've, which I think has been helpful, is to title everything, all of your folders or documents in the same way that we have, so that you know that when you're trying to connect the two, that you have that document and you're pulling it in. I would say have everything in one folder. If you have some that you're working on but are not complete, move them out of the folder, because you don't want to be able to upload anything that's not correct or complete. Because on our end, it's going to look like it's complete. And so we just go through and check. So also, Kimber, did you want to add something about these asterisks? So these are required, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So if you see an asterisk next to any of the attachable documents, and then also above on any of the information that you'll be filling out, it just means that it's required. You have to provide something and attach those documents before you can before you can submit the application.
Thank you. And please just note as well on these attachments that they are just attachments, so you can attach anything. So if you attach maybe your attendance on there by accident, it is going to take it. So just be aware of that. And that's why it's nice to have a folder with everything in, so you can match everything up and match the titles up and just pull in that right document to those attachments. And then we'll have, that's the application piece of it, but there will be other documents obviously that go along with that, supporting documents. Any questions?
Sarah had her hand up just a second
Okay.
ago. She go back down, but
I did.
Tara.
Sorry, I was just typing it in. On this upload, are we allowed to upload multiple attachments? I'm thinking specifically of like letters of support, because we have a bunch of different schools. Or are we going to have to combine that into a giant PDF and upload that one giant PDF?
You could do a PDF. I mean, a PDF I think is always nicer if you have more than one letters of support. One thing that we wanted to add with that is that if you have more than 6 programs, you can provide just a sample to us. It was something that Jessica and I were chatting about yesterday. So if you do have a huge amount of programs that you maybe need superintendents or directors or teachers to be able to submit, you only would need to do a sample of 6. But it might be nice to be able to add that to one PDF just so you have it all together.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions?
I was just going to add to that too. I think on one of the other grants that we did, if you do have a lot of letters that you want to submit and you don't want to have to attach them into one PDF, we have provided the school readiness at utah.gov email. So, and I'm just kind of typing this in the chat. So as long as you're indicating that it's for, the ESA grant and then what organization they're for, just so we know specifically there are the support letters for the ESA grant, that's totally fine too.
There's an additional question in the chat from Katrina regarding the multiple year contracts. If we receive a 3-year contract and additional funding becomes available, will we be able to apply for additional funding?
Sorry, can you ask, so if they get a 2-year contract, would they be able to apply for additional funding within the 2 years, or for an additional year?
Yeah, Katrina, would you like to unmute and ask the question to to clarify? Okay.
We'll also talk about that when we get into the budget. So we
Okay,
can.
so we should
Yeah.
hold on that. And we can answer that on the Q&A.
Yeah, and maybe, you know, I don't know if you're meaning like, if could you get that additional 3-year? I guess what you would do is just after the 2 years is up, then you would apply again, and potentially you could get through to another 2-year or a 3-year.
I think she just means if, like, in terms of our funding, the school readiness funding, if there's more available funding and they've already set their budget. So we'll talk about the
Oh, got
the
it.
second and third year budgets later.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe Katrina, once you, yeah, when we were chatting about that, if you can get your mic to work, then you can ask that question again. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go over the purpose. So the Expanded Student Access Grant increases eligible student access to existing high quality school readiness programs. High quality preschool programs have been shown to be effective in preparing young children for kindergarten. So this is just a little bit of background for those of you that have not been on this grant and this is your first time applying for this grant. This initiative was originally a Senate bill. So we had the Pay for Success piece come out, then we had Becoming High Quality that came out as a House bill, and then a year later, this came out as a Senate bill, and it used to be HQSRE, I believe, and then in 2019, the Pay for Success piece, the results-based, the Becoming High Quality, and the Expanded Student Access Grant all merged into a Senate bill. And that was because we ultimately there was a need for the Becoming High Quality grant to be able to transition smoothly, to have a smooth pipeline into expansion. So really preparing those grantees to get to a level of quality and then to transition over. This grant this last year has actually had some amendments. So we've added the links underneath the preschool program section, which gives you the 2019 bill that was, as a breakdown of the changes of the merge that happened between the two grants. And then the 2022 amendments can be found in the link underneath the 2019 code link. And that there are some changes, but the biggest changes that have happened are so that there's equality between, there's an equal standing between local education agencies and private providers, where the lead teachers will have a year to be able to get their either a CDA credential or an associate's degree in an early childhood related field. And then the second kind of larger piece is that students who are currently in foster care are automatically considered as eligible students. And so that eligibility form will change, and we are working on a Spanish version to be translated at this time, and we will get that out to you as soon as possible. And we'll talk a little bit about that eligibility form and how it's used later. And then the initiative aims to increase school readiness, improve academic performance, and increase quality of preschool programs. Okay, so this grant also supports eligible high quality providers of early childhood education programs to expand access to high quality school readiness programs for eligible students to increase school readiness, improve academic performance, and reduce remediation costs associated with poor academic outcomes. Available to programs serving eligible students. So you would need to be serving, and this grant focuses on children that are aged between 3 or 4 before September 2nd, 2022, who are either economically disadvantaged with at least one risk factor, or they can be an English learner that would automatically qualify them as an eligible student, or if they're currently in foster care. And just to add to that, if you have, we had this last year, so we had a student that qualified that was in foster care, and foster care students automatically qualify for free and reduced lunch. And that student, I believe, Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, was that student transitioning into being adopted into a
Yeah, so
into a
so
family?
the student was in foster care and then was adopted by the foster parents, and there was a concern that did they still qualify. So we have determined that these eligibility forms are good for a school year. So if they are eligible when they fill the form out, you do not need to worry about going back and redetermining eligibility if anything changes. It's good for an entire school year.
Great, thank you, Jessica.
But come the next fall, if that child's still there, they need to fill out a new one. But for one school year, it's good.
Great, thank you. So the next slide for the eligibility determination forms, a lot of you have seen this form. For those of you that this might be a new form to you, this is kind of the layout. It's not everything within the form, but this is just a breakdown of the eligibility determination form. So off to your right-hand side, you will see kind of a breakdown of how the first page will look like for the English version. There will be a second page for the English version where the parents or the guardians or they will be able to determine a range of risk factors. So they do not need to check off the risk factors, but they will give you a range. So they'll say, this child has zero risk factors, or this student has 1 to 3 risk factors, or 4 to 7 risk factors. So there's a range. That is something that the guardian fills out, and then as a director or as a teacher, you would complete the top right-hand corner on the right-hand side where it says for office use only. You will then say if that child is eligible, yes or no. And if they are eligible, you mark all that apply underneath. So are they an English learner? Are they a foster care student? Are they economically disadvantaged? And as you know, the more risk factors these students have, the more difficult it is for them to be successful. We have research on that where it's incredibly difficult for them to be successful within school with all of these, the more risk factors they have. And so we ask that you prioritize those students with the higher risk factors. We know that that's tough because we know that's, parents don't, or guardians don't always come at the same time to be able to enroll their students for school. So, but just be aware of these risk factors. This is also a form that I think if you're having your teachers provide this to the guardian, that they be really sensitive about sharing this form and really break this down for the guardians or parents to be able to tell them what this is for. I think you can tell them that this information never leaves your site. So this is a document also that stays at your site and locked away, because it is sensitive, very sensitive information. Every year I say this, but I've had parents reach out to me and ask me if I'm from DCFS and if I'm going to be knocking at their door at any point, and just please help them to know that this information does not get sent back, that it's just something that you keep for your records to ensure to determine that eligibility for the kids, and remind them that they do not need to circle those risk factors, and maybe it's a nice form to have for orientation so that you can review this with all of the parents or guardians that come through your program. But this is something that they will complete, and then you will determine whether they're eligible once they've completed the form. Any questions about the eligibility determination form?
It looks like Laureen has a question.
Okay, Laureen.
So on the eligibility form, you said that you're waiting for the Spanish translation because we need a new one. So
Yes.
we usually do ours when we do our registration event is the second week of April. So I was wondering timeline wise if that might get out, and if it's not, do I just need to wait and do the form come the beginning of the school year? So that's question number one.
I
Do
think
you want me to answer that for you before you move on to the second?
Yes.
Okay, yes, so we will, I am 99% sure we will have this out very soon and before the date that you have your orientation. And we have most of it, we have, you know, all of it translated apart from a section underneath one of the tables that we needs to be translated. So that has been submitted. I've asked them to send that back to me as a high priority. So we should have that back within the next couple of days. And then what happens is Jessica will put everything into a nice PDF and then we can send it out to you. So you have access to that eligibility form.
Super. So then my next question is, because you say it's good for a school year. So if I have the parent, because we usually do it at the registration event because we're one-on-one with them. So you can explain that this form just stays here and that type of thing. So they fill that out in April. Is that good for that school year, or am I just have to wait until
No,
actual year starts?
that's good. Go by the date of the form. So if the form is for the 22-23 school year, then it's good for that year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if those kids are coming back to if they're coming to your classrooms next year and it's this, the current form that we are going to be sending out, then yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for your question. Any other questions? Okay, so let's move on to eligibility requirement. Oh, sorry.
There's a question in the chat. Heather's asking if there's an explanation cover letter form that we can provide them.
I think she's talking about the resource doc, or the reference document, which has the table and then the definition of an English learner. And yes, will come in the packet so we'll have like the English form with the English resource doc, Spanish form with the Spanish resource doc. That will all come in one PDF shortly.
Thank you. Okay, so eligibility requirements. So just to be sure that your programs need to be existing, you can't be wanting to open up a preschool program and then want to come on this grant. You have to be functioning. So be sure that your program's already functioning. I believe all of you are. And then applicant must be existing an early childhood program. They must either be one of the following: a local education agency, a charter school with early childhood education provided by an LEA, a private preschool provider, or a charter school with an early childhood education provided by a private provider. Requirements of a high quality program. Components are defined in Utah code. We have this code here. We will also send you, along with the recording and the Q&A, the questions that we have coming through the feed here. We will also send you this PowerPoint, so you'll have access to this code as well. So just be aware of whether you're quality and look through that code. We can pull that up quickly if we need to, if you wanted to just click on that, Chelsea, and we can just. Thank you. So this just goes through the elements of high quality. So just as an example, you need to have ongoing focused intensive professional development, ongoing assessment of student educational growth. I won't go through them all, but family engagement, kindergarten transition plan. So just be aware of those elements of quality and talk about, obviously there can't be any gaps. You would need to be meeting all of those elements of quality. If there's room for improvement, you can stress that you have a plan to be able to, like, you can say we're doing this, but we would love to do this. So that's always nice to be able to read through those things. So and look at your goals and potentially your goals for the next 2 to 3 years. And then applicants will be, thank you, Chelsea. And then applicants will be evaluated for high quality status before being scored to evaluate potential awards. And you can look at attachment H for expanded student access score sheet for evaluators. So we've pulled in, we do not score. So those of us that work on the application and building the application, we are pulled out from that scoring process. We do help to moderate, but since we work closely with a lot of you, we are pulled out from that, and because we created that application. So we do pull in a scoring committee that have been chosen by Utah USBE representatives, the Children's Center representatives, and then Office of Childcare representatives. So we have a portion of scorers that we bring in, and then we go through their conflict of interest, and then we also redact all of the information so that there isn't any bias there in terms of one program over another. So we do redact those things, and then the scoring process occurs for the application and then the supporting documents. I also want to add that we do also, there are additional points for returning grantees, just because in code it states that priority will go to returning grantees. So Jessica, Jared, and I do a form of scoring. It's a very small portion of the scoring piece, and we just score on those that are returning grantees to see just in terms of performance and how they've done for the school year. And so that is a small section that we, Jared, Jessica, and I do score on. Eligibility requirements. So student performance outcomes, the applicant must demonstrate current students that have shown academic improvement and assessment to show the existing preschool program is capable of meeting required performance measures for this grant. Because we don't have a PEEP threshold yet, we will again this year be asking for pre, mid, and post assessments. We do have an example of a graph of potentially how it could look. If you have another way of pulling your data, which I know a lot of you do, it's completely fine. You do not have to replicate that graph. Just be sure that obviously the data that you're providing is demonstrating easily for scorers to be able to come in and show that there has been growth from pre to post, and that they can see the standards that you're using and the skills, that you're using to measure those outcomes. And then for grant year 2022 to 2025, the board has approved the use of internal pre, mid assessment data, as this means to demonstrate student performance outcome measures. And then student performance outcome measures are outlined in attachment L. So take a look at those application examples. And then you will need to include a graph and a data summary for your assessments, and then data for each location up to a maximum of 6 sites. We understand that if you're submitting, now, did we state that we were going to have this year's or last year's? I believe it was Kimber.
Yes.
In the RFGA, did we ask for this year? So if we're asking for this year's, it would be pre and mid, but if it was last year's, they'd be able to provide pre, mid, and post. I believe it was last year's for pre, mid, and post.
I think you are correct, but I'm going to pull that specific information up so I can, give me just a second and I'll find it.
Okay.
In the narrative, it does say 2020, 2021 school year.
Okay, thank you. Is that Jamie?
That's Lori.
Oh, it was Lorraine.
Oh, Lori, sorry. Thanks, Lori. So it will be last year's pre, mid, and post. I know I know one year we asked for the current year, and so we just asked for pre and mid, and in here we say pre and mid, but it is pre, mid, post, and that's what kind of caught me off guard, because it does say pre, mid here, so we'll change that. So it should say the pre, mid, and post, and it is for 2020 to 2021. So thanks, Laureen.
Michonne has a question, Emma.
Michonne, hello.
You just answered it. That was my question, so thanks.
Oh, thank you. Any other questions?
There was a question in the chat, but I wasn't sure if, I know Jessica raised her hand, so I don't know. I just didn't know who was first.
Yeah, my question is the instructions, yeah, of course, and you just answered it to include data from the 2020-2021 school year. But if we have sites that we just opened up this last year and we don't have data from those sites, I was just wondering.
So you can do data from this for this year for the pre and the mid, but you just in your narrative, you would have to just let the scorers know. So you have to, inform them, and that's the most important piece, is just not assuming that they know, because they're not going, everything is going to be redacted. They're not going to know anything about your programs. And so just communicating it clearly to help them to understand your program. And so part of that could be like, we have data for these programs because they were existing. So we provided the pre, mid, and post, but some of these classrooms that have been running this just this year, we don't have that previous data. And so pre and mid is what we're providing, just because that's kind of all the data we have right now, and just providing a little bit of a narrative with that, and just being clear but concise. That's always nice for scorers to be able to have that guidance and knowledge of your program.
Okay, great, thank you. And then I just had one other quick question just to clarify. It looked like in the instructions you wanted data broken down by student, but then there's also an instruction that says like not to include individual student data. So I was just a bit confused by that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was confusing. So we do not want you to use student information. So you would just disaggregate that data and just provide, you can provide an overall pre-mid or pre-mid and post assessment data for your program ride for your students.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, can you clarify the disaggregate? Do you want the qualified included with the disaggregate? Like, so all the students in the aggregate and then just the qualified in the disaggregate?
So I think let's pull up, Kimber, can you pull up the RFGA for that section, and let's read through that together, just so that we're all clear on what we expect. So I'm going to have Kimber take over, if that's all right, and we can read through it together.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so it says for this multi-year grant 2022 to 2025, the Utah School Readiness has approved the use of an internal pre, mid, and post data as the means to demonstrate student performance outcome measures as required by Utah code. As preschool entry and exit, PEEP, and kindergarten entry data is collected and compiled, this will be the means of demonstrating student performance in future grant programs. However, while a baseline is being determined for these tools, the applicant must provide pre, mid, and post assessment student data for 3- and 4-year-olds that demonstrates the program currently meets student performance outcome measures. Student data must be submitted both for overall student aggregated data for each age group, as well as pre, mid, and post assessment results disaggregated by economically disadvantaged students to submit your most recent program data that includes pre, mid, and post assessments for your preschool program. So let's scroll down. So the data must include, we want your program name, your site name and location, overall program student data, pre, mid, post assessments for school year 2020 to 2021. And then we want 2021 to 2020 to 2021 aggregated data for 4-year-old preschool students at each proposed grant site. And then if you have more than 6 grant sites, you just can send up to 6. So you don't need to be sending, you know, a huge amount of data. Disaggregated data by each student for each site reported. So we want basically to, and then we want it broken down by core standards for each skill. So I think that we originally had it for your 3-year-olds, but in here we just said, let's just, we're going to provide the data for your 4-year-old students, even though in the year we would like to see potentially 3- and 4-year-old preschool students, but we want a sample of the aggregated data for your 4-year-old students. It does state in here so yeah, we just want an overall program wide data for all of your programs. So we want an overall, and then if you have more sites, we want a breakdown of your sites for your 4-year-old student data. And then if you have more than those 7, if you have more than those sites, just provide a maximum of 6. Is that helpful?
So if you can just clarify, the disaggregate is all 4-year-olds, including qualified, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and then the aggregate is just the qualified 4-year-olds.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
We do need to do those separately.
Yes.
One of, are the eligible students included in with all of the students? Or do we have to take them out?
You can include them, but then we have so we have one that's for, I believe we're including them. Is that correct, Jared and Jessica?
Yeah, we want like total overall students and then eligible students separate.
Yeah.
And did you just say by 4-year-old only?
Yes.
Linda
Yeah.
had her hand raised.
Emma, do you want, so you want that by site for 4-year-olds and then combined program 4-year-olds, correct?
Yes, that's correct. So by site, we just do the amount of sites that you have. But if you, let's say you have 7 sites, you only need to send 6 sites worth of data.
Okay, thank you.
And then, and then an overall program wide. Linda, do you have a question?
Yeah, so just not to beat a dead horse, but I just want to be crystal clear. So for like a program who's using DOT, for example, so you would want the DOT report, or is the DOT report itself good for anything at all in its own? Is that okay for the program required data for the aggregated for the 6 classrooms? Or do you need it, like, because it doesn't come in English language arts, fine arts, health ed separately, we have to reconfigure the whole thing? Do you want that? So is the straight DOT report good for anything at all, or does it all have to be reconfigured?
I think so Jared and Jessica, I'm going to have you chime in. I think that if you didn't break down that data, I think that you would need to send along a narrative to say that that information is, even though there isn't that breakdown, you could potentially provide a narrative to say those standards are included, but they're combined within this skill, and they are, you know, you could provide some data that goes along with that. Jared and Jessica, what are your thoughts?
Well, I was understanding that because of the requirement to report the pre, mid, and post data based on the early learning standards that would need to be reconfigured. I know that that's a pain from, an instrument such as the DOT where you have to pull from different sections to get that. But like with the example in the RFGA that has, what a appropriate graph to report the data would look like, it should be, from my understanding here, is that it should be aligned with the early learning standards.
I think this might be one that we want to discuss as a group outside of this and post it to the Q&A, because I'm a little torn. Linda, if you could send us a sample of like what that looks like, and where the standards are embedded within, that would be, I think we've done that in years past, where as long as there, like Emma was saying, there's a narrative saying these are where the content areas are within this, that would be good. So if you want to send us one of those, and then we can talk about it as a team, and then we'll post it to the Q&A. I think that would be the best option.
Linda, what have you done? What have we asked you to do in years past? Because I guess we obviously, in terms of scoring, we want to make sure that the scorers, because the scorers will be looking, they will have access to the standards, and they will be making sure that things are connecting up. And so I don't want there to be, and I know that you don't want there to be as well, someone to, scorers to come back and say they're not, meeting these, what is being asked of. And so the only reason why, like, if it's a huge amount of work to be able to reconfigure that information and that data, I do think that potentially you could provide some type of narrative or a data to break that down, to show that you are meeting those, and that there is progress and within the pre, mid, and post. But what have you submitted in the past? Have you had to reconfigure all of your data?
We've done it two different ways. One year, we did have to reconfigure the whole thing, and it literally took me 2 weeks to prepare it, just doing that. It was because we had to print the whole reports, figure out which kids, move things all around, put it all into new spreadsheets. It was an extraordinary amount of work. The DOT does cover all of these areas, and we could create a thing, since many districts use this, we could create like a key that says English language arts is composed of these lines and fine arts is composed of these lines. And you can see that data very clearly, and it's a push of a button for us.
Okay. Yeah, I think if you could send us a sample, and I do think that if something can come along with that to show that these are embedded within these particular skills, and it can show that there is growth there, I think that would be sufficient. So you don't have to spend 2.5 weeks just on data, because this is a large application process, and we want you to be able to also focus on the other elements of this application too. So would you mind just sending us a sample of what it, Kimber, also, I want to be careful that we're following solicitation guidelines in terms of, are we giving kind of more information? I don't know. Kimber, can you add to that?
So yeah, kind of re-ask that again, because I'm not sure I fully understood what you were saying.
So if Linda sends us a sample of what we should send, what I'm concerned about is that we're, because it's a solicitation phase, we're giving feedback on what could potentially be sent. And I don't know if that's giving, so maybe we can't do that. I think that in my mind, and I know that Jared mentioned the other way, but in my mind, I think if you're sharing, and Linda, you said that in previous years, you've done it both years. So was it last year that you sent a key that showed these skills fit within these broader skills?
Yeah, 1 year it was just accepted as the DOT. We didn't have to send a key. I think that was 2 years ago. And then I think it was last year that we had to reconfigure everything. So It does say that internal measurements are acceptable. So that might be a point of clarification to say if those are acceptable and we can provide a key to show where these things are, is that acceptable? Because otherwise it's making us redo the whole thing. And then if there's any other districts who are using DOT who'd like to give input on that, please contact me and we can work on that together.
Is there anybody else that's kind of in the same situation?
We use the dot up at Cache. So that would be awesome, Linda. Thank you.
We use the dot in Jordan as well.
Okay. Okay, so I think that we've got this question on hand. I think Jessica, Jared, and I and Kimber can talk about this together. In my mind, I feel fine with you submitting, and like Linda, like you said, you can use your internal data as long as these scorers can come in and clearly see that your students are showing growth in these skill areas. And then if you're providing a key and a breakdown to say, we do have these skills embedded within these larger skills, and this is how they've shown growth in these areas, I think that would be fine. But I know Jared kind of had a different perspective. So we'll talk about it internally, and we will get back to you, and we'll add it to the Q&A as well as reach out to you. So remind me, so we've got Alpine, Cache, Jordan. Anyone else that we need to respond to with this specific question?
Yes, Wasatch also uses the dot.
Wasatch, thanks, Tara.
And since the internal monitoring tools ideally are for program growth and program tracking, I think that, I think it would be wonderful to be able to use those with the key. But yeah, we'll discuss and get back with you because that would be ideal.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so we'll make sure Alpine, Cache, Jordan, and Wasatch. And if anybody else wants us to respond, but this will go to the Q&A, but then we will also respond directly to these specific school districts that have expressed that they use the dot and potential different ways of being able to express and share their data and student growth. So thanks, Linda, for that question. We will get back to you on that.
Emma.
Yeah.
There's also a question from Celine in the chat about they had switched their benchmark assessment to a different one this year. And they're wondering if they can use last year's data for pre, mid, and post, but also include this year's pre and mid because it's a better measure of their program.
Yeah, I think you can. And I think that you just add a narrative to say, we saw we saw that there was a need in shift. We saw that there was a need to change curriculums, and here's why. And so we're going to provide you as well with the pre and the mid data, just so you can have an accurate measurement of growth.
And then Christy's asking if there's no 3-year-old data required.
No 3-year-old data required, just 4-year-old.
Okay, so then we have Heather is just clarifying, says all 4s program wide and also per classroom graph, and then eligible 4s program wide and also classroom graph, correct?
Yes.
That's all I have.
Sorry, I didn't raise my hand, but how do you do if we have eligible students? How do we do the classroom graph if we're just doing 6 classrooms, or should we just do overall eligible students because they're in more than 6 classrooms? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you can do it. You can do it by classroom, so you can break them down by classrooms. You would just obviously disaggregate that data, or you could do a program. You could do a breakdown of all of them and just show how they're and just show the growth in that way. Jared and Jessica, do you have anything to add?
Just thinking that the classroom sample of eligible students is going to be super small. And so I don't feel like we could get a lot for that. So what I would say is program overall, program eligible students overall, and then the sample of 6 overall classrooms, not breaking down eligible student by classroom.
That way we could show, or we could see progress made by the full, the full students and the grant eligible students.
Okay, so let's clarify this one last time. Okay, program overall. We've got then program overall for eligible students. So you've got your program overall 4-year-olds. You've got your program overall eligible 4-year-old students. And then you've got your program classroom that will just it's just all of your 4-year-old kids for your program classrooms.
Yeah, for a max of 6, right?
For a max of 6.
Sounds good to me. So don't disaggregate by eligible student for the classroom reports, just do total classroom.
And we will add, again, this in the Q&A, just so that it's crystal clear to everyone that you're submitting the right data. Okay, any more questions about data?
Looks like Lorene had a question, her hand raised.
Lorene?
So then with all of those, it's showing by core standards. So each of those graphs, so it's not just an overall, each of those graphs, program-wide, all students, is by standards and by standard areas. And then all program eligible students is by the standards. And then each site is by standards. Is that accurate?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. And again, I mean, I think, Alpine, Cash, Jordan, Wasatch use the DART. And so if your internal assessment does cover all of the core standards, but it might not potentially break everything down by exact name, just be cognizant of that and make sure that you're adding some type of potentially a key or a narrative, short narrative to say, this says mathematics, but this covers, mathematics and science, and here's the breakdown, if that makes sense. So just making sure that if it doesn't call out those core standards, that you're calling them out, so that you're helping the scorers to understand your tool and how it functions, and helping them to understand that it does meet the core standards. It's just not going to break everything down in the exact same category. Okay, any more questions?
Julie did ask a question about the summary scores from pre-mid and post. She says it adds up the percentages at the bottom. She's wondering if it should add up the number of students.
I've had this question for years. I thought I'd finally ask.
Julie, say that again.
Just at the bottom where it says the total, it's totaling up the percentage. So it just seems a little redundant because you've got 700% at the end. I'm not sure if that's what you were looking for, because it doesn't actually show you how many students are involved. Is that what you're looking for?
No, this is just, so these aren't, they look like percentages on there, but it was under a different, it was kind of what they could score as minimum, but ultimately this is just an example. So however you do it, you do not need to tell us the amount of students that you have. Really, we just want to see the percentage of kids from pre-mid to post broken down by core standards, and how they're, just the growth, So
I don't need to add it up at the bottom because
no,
okay.
You don't. No.
Okay, thanks.
And maybe we'll change that now you've mentioned it, so that it's not so confusing. We think we're being crystal clear, right? But so it's good to have this feedback. It's good. to get that information so that we can make the appropriate changes. But yeah, just percentages under the core standards to demonstrate pre to post student growth for 4-year-olds.
Emma.
Yes.
I had a question. Hi.
Hi, Claudia.
It's about disaggregated data by student. In this part, did you want us also to put a chart per students, like, or what is it? Additional to the, the graphic chart?
No. If you just if you take a look at the graph that's being presented right now, so all we need is, and I know that might also seem confusing, so we'll take a look at that language. So if you could provide, a table, a summary of the scores, and then a graph, and it can look like this, or it can look as long as it's meeting those core standards.
But nothing by students, right?
Not by students, no. We
just draw me that part.
Yeah, we just want a program overall.
Okay.
For 4-year-olds. We want a program eligible overall for 4-year-old students, and then we want program classrooms for 4-year-olds with a max of up to 6.
Perfect. Thank you.
So let's say you have, 5 classrooms. You would give us the two of the program overall and program eligible 4-year-old, and then you would give us 5 of your program classroom overall, right? So
yes,
that would be 7 graphs total.
Okay, so then it will be 4 years entire overall program and 4 years eligible only. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And again, we'll put this in the Q&A, and maybe in the Q&A as well, we can add some sample graphs and give some examples of, like, let's say you have 10 classrooms, right? You would give us a program overall for 4-year-olds, a program eligible student for overall, so that's 2, and then you would give us a maximum of 6 for program classroom 4-year-olds, so that would be 8 graphs total. Okay, any more questions? Okay. All right, eligibility requirements. So programs that are not eligible to participate are applicants receiving Becoming High Quality grant funds for fiscal year 2023. So you can't be receiving Becoming as well as Expansion together, and then grantees currently participating obviously may apply. And then eligible student enrollment, grantees must target funding towards the highest risk student by prioritizing eligible students with the greatest number of risk factors. We reviewed that eligibility form, so we'll be sending out a new version shortly. And then you would also be, grants would be expected to maintain proposed new enrollment of eligible students during the grant. So be aware that at the board meeting this year, we did approve current grantees to be reimbursed at 100%, even if they're falling below that 80% until the end of the year. And then we will have a discussion with the board next year to see if any accommodations need to be made with COVID, or if we're going to go back to just, reimbursing you at your actual number of students that you share with us each month. And then in terms of the Early Childhood Environmental Rating Scale, ECHAS 3, quality observation tool will be used as a snapshot to evaluate classroom environments and teacher-student interactions as a minimum threshold for quality. Grantees must make classroom serving eligible students available to verify maintenance scores over a minimum threshold for high quality programming, as well as supporting evaluation and coaching. So just as a reminder, these thresholds are 3 for local education agencies, that's the minimum threshold. And then for private providers, it's a 3.67. overall score with a 4 in interactions and a 4 in language and literacy. And then I don't know if we have any questions on those grant component pieces?
Emma, would you clarify for private providers is 3.67?
Yeah, 3.67 overall. And then with a minimum threshold of a 4 in interactions and a 4 in language and literacy.
Okay, so 367 overall. Yeah, that went down, huh? From 4 last year.
No, so it's always been 3.67 overall.
Overall, and 4 in literacy and language.
Yeah, 4 in interactions and and a 4 in language and literacy.
It's aligned with CCQS.
And there's a question from Katrina in the chat about if there's going to be a change to the ECRS 3 thresholds. So if you're not aware, the School Readiness Board pre-COVID charged a research subcommittee to review both the ECRS tool and the class tool to determine if the School Readiness Board wants to change or if we need to change the thresholds. There has been a lot of discussion about that at the School Readiness Board meetings. We, during this last bit, when we were going out and observing all of you, we did 30 classrooms that were both class and ECRS. And so we will shortly begin working in that research subcommittee and should have a decision in the coming months, which we will then share with you. So that may be a switch of the tool, it may be a switch of the thresholds. It will depend on what the research subcommittee chooses. Katrina, do you still
Well, it actually, I just want to clarify, it depends on what the board votes on, because the research committee will give a recommendation and the board actually finalizes that vote.
Yes.
So it depends on the vote of the board.
And as for next year, since it's in the grant proposal here, it will be the ECRS tool unless there's a change on the SR board with the current thresholds.
Right. Yeah, and if there is a switch, you guys will need a year to process said switch, so it won't be like an immediate switch over. You'll have a year to get your classrooms and teachers familiar with whatever the change may be before a change would be implemented. Katrina, do you still have questions?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hallelujah. Okay, so thinking about, say we get on a 2 or even a 3-year contract, Jared just clarified that we would be evaluated for this coming school year, the 2022-23 school year, using the ECRS tool. If the board votes to implement another tool, and that were to be like released mid this 3-year contract that we have, and we're going to be evaluated like for the 23-24 school year, would that mean like 2 evaluations in that year and then the following year would be the new tool? Or would it mean like we're using ECRS 1 year and then we're expected to switch, say, to the class the next year? Like, how is that change going to line up if there is a change, or if there's a change in the threshold, how would that line up across this multiple year grant award?
So you wouldn't have to be reevaluated. We would, if like once we make the tool and you have that year to like learn about the new tool, it wouldn't be like we have to end your grant cycle. If it's within your grant year, like, and you score low, it would be probably more like a corrective action plan and like, let's support you in becoming more familiar with the tool and making those changes. But whatever you're awarded with 2 to 3 years, like that's good. Unless you were like extremely non-compliant, not willing to change, really causing problems. But otherwise, we're really there to support you. And I would say more of a corrective action plan. It's kind of hard to say because like it's not over. We don't know what we're doing yet. But it will be very clear what that plan is, what the rollout is, and we really will make sure that there is time for the learning curve of we are making a switch here. And before you're held accountable to this new tool, you have time to learn it and implement it.
Yeah, and I think that, Katrina, we, like Jessica said, we don't know yet. So we would have to talk about that internally, and we could potentially send out a survey to you and to get kind of your feedback and how long you think it could potentially take to kind of transition over. And you know, your contract is, you know, in place in terms of your ECAS 3, and so that's the tool that we currently use. And I know that most people are aware that we are having that research committee, but again, we don't even know if that tool is even going to change, because it really comes down to the proposal, and then ultimately like the recommendation, and then ultimately the board votes on those things. So again, we don't know, but we'll, like Jessica said, we would make it, you know, fair to those that are already on the grant and not expect those changes to happen suddenly, if any changes do actually occur. And same with, like, if we stick with ECAS 3 and the threshold does change, we would work with you and provide potentially like more training and then coaching support. So yeah, there's things we'll have in place to help support for sure. Okay, if there are no further questions with grant components, I know this is still continuing on with grant components, but I'm going to transition the time over to Jessica.
Okay, here we go.
Sorry, there was one more question that popped up real quick. I don't know if you guys want to answer this. Linda did ask if the unannounced ECAS 3 evaluations will be conducted every year if an entity is granted the 3-year contract.
I would say
yes.
TBD.
Yes.
Or you think yes?
Yeah,
I would just say
yes.
We will definitely want to be doing them, because we don't like how we got behind because of COVID. That was not fun for us as a team to try to fit in as many as we did. I think it is true. Yeah, we will want to do it, because what I was thinking about is the year threshold. Like we were saying that they were good for a year. But especially with a bigger program, we're going to be in there a lot so that we have plenty going around. So, but you'll always know when we're starting an unannounced observation window. Like you'll always have warning, like, okay, we're starting to come out to programs. We're never going to show up without any warning. Okay. Alrighty, so we're going to talk about the PEEP. So the PEEP is required for all of school readiness grant participants. So you only administer the PEEP assessment to students who are 4 years old before September 2nd of the school year, so 2022. So these are for our 4-year-olds or our preschool students that will be going to kindergarten next year. If they're going to have another year of preschool, we are not assessing them. The USBE has provided training so that teachers can administer the assessment with fidelity. And it's on our PEEP website. If you just Google Utah PEEP, you will find it. And there are Canvas courses that teachers can do asynchronously, or you can watch YouTube recordings. We also consider that if a preschool director or a coach was to watch the YouTube training and then turn around and give that training to their staff, we consider that to be with fidelity. And then we will be analyzing results and report to the board. We're really excited. We're working on growth measures right now because it's been a little tricky, but PEEP entry and PEEP exit are different assessments. It's tricky to measure growth. And so we're working with the Center for Assessment to create growth measures. So this should be the last year that you guys are submitting pre-mid and post data. We should be moving to the PEEP after that. Okay, next slide. Okay, so appropriation and sustainability. So grantees are expected to have a sustainability plan to maintain high quality programming. We know that this is easier said than done, in that there isn't a lot of preschool funding around, but we hope that as you are growing your preschool program, this is a thought and you are creating a sustainability plan to the best of your ability. Grantees should also consider how to maintain quality while keeping ongoing costs in check. Again, you're the high quality program, and we want to make sure that that high quality is being maintained throughout changes that your program may go through over time. It's not designed to provide ongoing financial support, and it's subject to new legislation changes and changes in appropriation, which we saw during COVID when we got our changes, our funding changed to the CCDF funding. So just know that we are we're dependent on the legislature. Okay. Okay, so like I mentioned, we are using funding from the Child Care Development Fund, the CCDF block grant. With that comes the requirements from child care licensing. These funds can only be used to support increased, we go back. Funds can only be used to support increased access for eligible students to existing high quality early childhood education programs. We're really funding student seats. The funding cannot supplant current funding. So you can't say, you know, we're funding this with this funds, but we're going to switch it out and start using grant funding. And then it can't be used for staff bonuses. Again, this grant is really focused on providing student seats. Keep in mind that your proposed budgets in your grant applications may be adjusted or modified when negotiating contract terms. So put in there what you dream, but then we as a school readiness team will kind of bring it back to reality and what funding we have available. But also keep in mind that since we're doing multi-year grants for the first time, that as things change, you can always reach out to us for a budget adjustment to see if that can be approved. And then grant funds must be spent by June 30th, 2024 for 2-year grants and by July 30th, 2025 for 3-year grants. And then unspent funds do not carry over. I see that we have a comment from Katrina in the chat. It says, can you clarify that statement not intended to provide ongoing financial support? That reads to me that there are intended limits on how many years the grant is meant to be awarded. Is that correct? No. So with becoming high quality, there is a limit. You're only able to be on the grant for 3 years because we hope that by 3 years of support you've been on the grant, you'll be able to be at quality. And if you're not, then we're no longer going to support that. With expanded student access, there is no limit to how many times you can be on the grant. However, it is constant solicitations. And so that's what we're really getting at is it's not, it's tricky because it really is ICESA becoming eventually how we're funding preschool. And so we've asked you guys to expand and support these students. And for a lot of you, there really is no other funding source. But we have to state that it is not that we build your program and it will be maintained forever. It's always dependent on solicitation. So if you continue to meet requirements and continue to make it through the solicitation, that you should be granted funding as long as you're scoring high. But there is no limit on how many years you can apply for the funding. And on the back end, we continue to work to make sure that there's more funding for preschool and that we can eventually change this model so that it isn't competing, because we need to eventually fund preschool and just fund preschool. So know that we're always working really hard on the back end to make that happen. But at this time, it's a constant solicitation. Yes, Katrina, your last statement is correct. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So like we said, we're doing multi-year grants this year for the first time ever, which we're all super excited about, and hopefully that you guys are excited too, that you can at least have a year off or 2 years off from completing the application. So for the 2-year grant period, it'll be July 1st from 2022 to 2024. And then for the 3 years, it'll be July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2025. We'll be doing monitoring throughout each of the periods, regardless of if it's a 2 or 3 year grant. And again, funding is not guaranteed as it is awarded at the discretion of the board. So again, we have to have the scorers score, you have to meet those thresholds, but at the end, we assemble a budget of recommendation for the board, and the board will vote on if those programs should be awarded. Okay, we can move forward. I'm just reading the chat real quick. Yes, so we will take a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at, I think we're okay. Well, Emma, how do you feel about rounding to 10:30? Are we okay with that?
Yeah,
Or do you
that's
wanna
fine. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do a
I
little.
did a thumbs up, but I don't think you could see me. But
Yeah, I was
it's great.
spotlighted, so I can only see me right now.
Oh, that's right.
So yeah, so go ahead and take a break and we will see you all at 10:30.
Okay, it's 10:30, so let's go ahead and pick back up here. Yeah, I don't know about you, but that, even though it was a longer than a 5-minute break, it seemed to zoom by a little bit. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump back in and continue on here a little bit. I'll be talking a little bit about some of the process involved with the application. And Emma mentioned some of these things, but I just wanted to go into a little bit more detail and talk a little bit more here. First off here, as far as the evaluation and award, as far as how things are scored here. As Emma mentioned, we have sought out external reviewers, so none of us will be reviewing the applications. External reviewers will be reviewing the applications and scoring them based on the score sheet that's in the RFGA packet. The score sheet can be found on attachment H. That's pages 67 through 82 of the RFGA packet. It's fairly lengthy, but that gives specific information about what the scorers and what the raters will be reviewing the application on and assigning scores for each one. There's a minimum baseline of 107 points. If an application score falls under that 107 points, then it will not be considered for funding. If it's above 107 points, so it's between 107 and 147 points, it will be considered for 2 years of funding. Anything over 147 points will be considered for 3 years of funding. I know that there's been some questions about the 2-year grant or 3-year grant, how that will be decided. That will be based on the scoring done by the external reviewers that will be reviewing and rating the applications. Just keep in mind that any successful application is subject to Government Records Access and Management Act or GRAMA rules and can be accessed for review. Then one other thing, keep in mind, all of this is based on funding and the number of applications and who qualifies at the different levels. Applicants may be awarded partial grants. So that will be after the scoring is done and after we see what funds are available to fund the grants. There might be adjustments made to the proposals to award a partial amount. Are there any questions about anything? Let me check the chat really quickly. Okay, if not, let's go ahead and move to the next screen. Okay, so evaluation and award. Applicants awarded by DWS. This I can see. The board will receive a notice of conditional award subject to these 4 factors. First off is availability of funds. How much money is available to distribute across the grant applications that meet the requirements. Successful contract negotiations, looking at what is proposed and what's available. Submission of all required documents described in the notice, and then the pre-award risk assessment. So once the decisions have been made, once the grants have been scored, there's a process that will be followed before it's submitted or before the awards are approved by the board. When do you anticipate these awards will be sent? When do you anticipate being able to send out the conditional award letters? That's a really good question. Let's move on to the next screen because I believe, oh, okay, it's done. It's in a couple of slides here that we'll get to those. Questions and addenda. As Emma mentioned earlier on, there is a process for submitting questions. Any questions that come up during this meeting, as well as any that are submitted in the Q&A submission form, and I will go ahead and put this link. I know that it's been there previously, but in the chat there's the Q&A submission form as well as the Q&A response page. Any questions submitted either in this meeting here or through schoolreadiness@utah.gov or the attached Google form or the link there will be posted on the question and answer page. Keep in mind the deadline to submit questions will be Thursday, April 14th by 5 p.m. That way there's time to clear those out for you to review those questions before the submission deadline. All questions and any possible addenda will be posted no later than Friday, April 15th by 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Let me see if there's any questions on that. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. So a little bit about the application process. These questions about when the due dates will be, go ahead to the next slide. This next slide gives the overall timeline. The first one is the pre-proposal meeting. That's this meeting here today, Tuesday, March 29th. The next deadline or the next date to know is Thursday, April 14th. As I just mentioned, this is the deadline for submitting questions for us to review and answer and post on the question and answer response page. Tuesday, April 19th at 5 p.m. is the application submission deadline. Once again, let me re-emphasize, I know that we talked about it at the beginning of the meeting. Please, if at all possible, don't leave it to the last minute. There's invariably, attachments that might not go through, or there might be, computer issues. If at all possible, please submit before this, so that we can have a chance to look and help along the way as far as if there's anything missing. Keep in mind, any submission that is submitted after that 5 p.m. deadline cannot be accepted and reviewed. That's the hard deadline. As far as the question about anticipated intent to awards, when the letters will be sent out, this will be in May. This will be associated with the School Readiness Board meeting dates. And then the grant start date is July 1st. And then let me check the question. Okay, Kimber responded to Julie on the question here. Okay, so that's the application process in a nutshell. Are there any questions here about the application process or the dates? Okay, let's go on to the next slide then. Okay, and this is, I will turn this over to Samantha to talk about the grant application documents required.
This is the fun part. Chelsea pulled up the application web form and before, so that's just what is linked in there. So these will be the attachments in the web form. So pre, mid, and post assessment student data provided in the form of graphs. So attachment L will give you examples of that. Letters of support, so leadership of host sites, key program stakeholders. You will want to include a detailed support of the program in the preschool program, detailed support of the grant in the preschool program, including description of space and personnel requirements. And we did limit, if you have more than 6 sites, 6, just send in 6 letters of support. And then certificate of liability insurance. So you have to be sure to include DWS as an additionally insured on your liability insurance. Supporting documentation of preschool lead teacher credentials. So include the teacher education levels and certifications. We can go to the next slide. Okay, so I have kids home for spring break. It's always fun. Okay, so then supporting financial documentation of historical costs of the preschool program. So in the form of an expense summary, so like a general ledger, associated chart of accounts, etc. And it has to be for the time period defined in the appendix 4 in the proposed budget narrative form. And then in addition, the child care licensing documentation, whether you're a licensed private preschool or legally licensed exempt. And then the next slide shows you, on the right-hand side, shows you the application that title page, right? That's the, oh no, that's the application score sheet, sorry. So the main grant application components scored after the high quality evaluation. So this is the score sheet that the scorers will use. They're going to verify the eligibility of your program. We're going to give those prioritization points for previous grantees. They're going to score your application goals and narratives. They're going to look at your letters of support and score those as well. They're going to score your proposed budget form and verify your lead teacher credentials. So like Jared said, applicants must score, oh, I don't know if Jared said this part. Applicants must score a minimum of an average total score of 107 points in order to move on to the main grant application evaluation. Lorene, you're unmuted. Did you have a question?
I do have a question.
Okay.
Back on the teacher qualifications.
Yes.
In the grant narrative, and I don't know if you're going to get to this part, how you guys are breaking this up, but it talks about including teacher resumes. If they have a degree, are you just putting in the degree as documentation of what they have of their credential, or we need, says attach all certificates, documentation of education as separate attachment, include teacher resumes, experience in early childhood related fields, and level of education, including supporting documentation of all lead teachers meeting the following credentials: CDA, AAAS, or BABS. I'm just wondering if we need both, or if their credential is enough, or.
Emma, do you have an answer to that?
Lorraine, yeah, you can just provide that credential. And they're letters, so you've got the letter of support. Yes, you can provide their credential if they have it. I think if they don't have it, you can provide a resume to kind of demonstrate their experience within the field. But if they have the credential, it's totally fine just to say they qualify. I think just some programs, because we have that year, some programs who have teachers that don't have that credential, they could potentially just send a resume to say, hey, they've had this much experience and they're working on their credential, and they'll have it within the year.
Sally, did you have a question?
What do you mean by you need credential? Can we just fill out the Excel spreadsheet and say that our teachers are licensed special education teachers, or do you actually need to see a document from every teacher?
We need to see a document for every lead teacher.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
You also can just get a screenshot of their Canvas cactus. So if they can log into their cactus and take a screenshot of their degree or their teaching license.
Yeah, because this is within code, it's law that teachers have to have their credentials within a year. And so we need to be able to clarify, we need to be able to go in and do a monitoring check to make sure that teachers are meeting those credentials, at least the lead teachers are. Just like when we come and monitor and do an ECAS 3, we need to be able to see that you're at a certain level. We need to see that you're meeting all of the elements of high quality, because it's law and it's stated within code. We have to make sure that grantees who are receiving these funds are meeting those expectations.
Christy is wondering if they're in the process of a CDA, what evidence is needed?
You can actually just let us know. You can, you don't need to add any evidence. Really, the only evidence we need to see is if they're meeting the credential. Just if in that spreadsheet you can add that they're on, like, you know, they've been working on this for 6 months and this is the intended date for them to complete their CDA. That's enough information. For letters of support, so Sarah Bunny asked, for letters of support, are we only allowed to submit 6 total, or is that applicable to letters for 6 sites, and letters from our stakeholders are allowed to total of more than 6? So you can do more than 6 letters. if you have stakeholders and you want to send a few more, that's fine. We just put a maximum of 6 so that applicants didn't feel like they had to send like 20 letters for every single program. We just put a max of 6. It's really, those letters are really to demonstrate that everyone's on board, and just because there are expectations in this grant, and if we have like, a director applying, but then the owner potentially doesn't agree, or this, we have a director applying and the superintendent wasn't aware of what was expected, that can cause conflict within the program. So just making sure that everybody's on board, just to make sure that you're good moving forward. Yeah, that's right, Heather.
Yes, Heather. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide unless there's other questions. We just didn't want people to be overwhelmed. So you only have to send letters of support for up to 6 of your sites. If you want to send in more, send in more.
But can we send in less, or it has to be 6?
6, if you have more than 6 sites, we would want 6 letters, right, Emma?
Ask the question again.
So she's wondering if she can send in less than 6 letters.
If you have less than 6 sites.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, what all we're saying is that, if let's say you have 20 sites, or, we're just saying 6 max. You don't have to send 20 letters of approval. We're just saying 6 max. So if you have fewer programs and fewer letters, yeah, we'd like to see one from the director, potentially some have sent in samples from teachers, some have sent in samples from, really it's like the overall functioning of the program. So we want to see from superintendents and directors to say, hey, we're on the same page and we understand. So if you have less than those, yes, you can send in less, that's fine.
Linda has a question. Linda?
I just think that maybe the confusion was, it sounded like there needed to be 1 per site for up to 6. So like the principal of that site and or the teacher for 6, and then additional stakeholders. But that's not the case, right? It's just stakeholders and a sampling from a few classrooms for a total of 6.
Correct. Yeah. So Linda, this kind of applies to potentially Alpine School District because you're a larger school district. So you can have a max of six letters, and you can decide who you think those important people are to be able to get into to be able to help. We want you to be able to communicate with those that need to know what the grant is about, so that they can say, yes, we're on board with you. And you get to decide who those people are.
Perfect, thanks.
All right. Uh-oh, I've been spotlighted. Okay, so checklist for application components. So attachment M is an application checklist, and this has just been included for your convenience to make sure that you have submitted and attached all the things, right? So you can go down and use this attachment so that you can make sure you have all the attachments you need and all the documentation you need for your application. So it's not a required, it's just there for your convenience to make sure that you have submitted everything. Go to the next slide. All right, and then application instructions and examples. So attachment L, we have, this can be found on pages 91 through 95 of the grant RFGA packet. All right, and then next is Joe to talk about budget.
Okay, thanks, Samantha. So as you're filling out the budget, you can also refer to attachment L. There's some example budget descriptions that will show you what we're looking for really in the budget description component of the budget. And if you could go to the next slide, and then I'll come back and cover this one. I'm not sure who is running the slides, but if you, there we go. So the way this budget will work is, if you're familiar with what we've done in the past, we base the budget and what we will pay out based on your historical preschool costs. So we'll have you submit a budget that tells us what your annual cost or your program costs are for your preschool per kid per month. And then if approved, this will calculate a monthly cost per seat per preschool seat, which you will bill us every month, and we will pay you based on the number of eligible kids in your program. And the three components to figuring out calculating your cost per seat will be the number of months in your program, the historical expenses that you're submitting in your budget, and the number of overall preschool kids that you are serving. And if we could go back to the previous slide, and I will try and share my screen here. Okay, hopefully that worked. Can you see the budget? I'm sorry, I haven't used Zoom before or shared on Zoom before.
Yeah, we can see it, Joe.
Okay, so this budget is broken out into several different tabs, and the main tab that you will complete is the historical cost tab. At the top section, you'll fill in your organizational name and the number of months in your preschool program. This is important because this is one of the factors that will calculate what your cost per seat is and how much you will end up getting paid for your eligible kids. Some programs might have a 9-month program or a 10-month program, and you'd want to make sure that you use the right number of months, the number of months that you're going to have attendance for your program next year, because those are the number of invoices that you're going to be able to submit. The next section is where you're going to tell us what your historical costs are for the last program that you've run. It could be, if you want to use a full program, you could use last year's historical costs, or if you could use the last 12 months, but you would want to use all of the historical costs that support the program that you indicated in the first section. So for example, if you have a 9-month program, but you pay your teachers over 12 months, which a lot of programs do, then you would put 9 months in the number of months of your program, but you do want to include all 12 months of the expenses in the historical costs so you could be reimbursed for the proper amount. And then the bottom section of this budget form asks for the number of overall preschool seats in your program, and would like a description of how you're coming up with that number of seats, if it's half-time seats, full-time preschool, however you're counting those. Please give us a description of how you're coming up with the number of seats. And once you've filled in that budget form, most of the rest of the budget is filled out for you. The organizational total will populate for the next 3 years, and it adds an inflation factor of 3.25% for each year. So we realize that everything's more expensive, and including preschool, and 3.25% might not cover your increase in expenses, but we wanted to cover some of that. So for year one, we're taking your historical costs and adding 3.25% and calculating what your cost per seat is based on the number of seats you have in your program. And then same thing for year 2 and year 3, we add another 3.25% for those subsequent years. And then the bottom section of the organizational total tab is where you would add additional costs. And I'll cover what those might be here in a minute, but just know that that piece is something that you would also fill in. It's not auto-populated. And then the final 3 tabs, the year 1, year 2, and year 3 are just populated by what you've input in on the first sheet. And so with that, I will stop sharing. Or maybe I'll just share the slideshow. So we covered on the main tab of the budget sheet, you'll fill in your number of months in your preschool program, break your historical expenses down based on these categories, and input the number of seats in your preschool, and then the form will calculate historically what is the cost of your preschool per seat per month. And that ultimately, with the inflation, will end up being the number that you bill us for each month.
Hey, Joe, it looks like there's a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if this is a good time to address them. It looks like the first question is from Tara. It says that the calendar only has 1 week of preschool in August. Should they do 9 months or 10 months for the budget proposal?
So you could do it either way, but you will end up billing us. So if you do include August and count 10 months, then you will need to bill us for 10 months. With that situation, I would recommend doing a 9-month program, which will increase your cost per seat. So you'll get more per seat, but you'll only bill us 9 times.
Okay. Then there's another question in the chat. Snack costs have increased by almost 25% in the past few months. How would an applicant account for recent jumps in costs that might not show up in a long-term historical cost?
So again, this is based on last year's costs. So it's not going to account for all of the increase in costs. We are accounting for 3.25% increase. In the past, we haven't been able to do that, but we felt it was important to do something this year. So I wouldn't anticipate that this will cover all of the costs of your program, but hopefully it would offset some of those increases.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and it looks like Julie has her hand raised. Julie, can you unmute to ask a question?
Yeah, I asked the question earlier about page 94 on the instructions. So we were denied snack last year. Is that something that you guys are allowing now?
So no, in attachment C, there is that list of allowable costs, which we'll go over here in a minute, and food is one of the items that is not allowable. So as you submit your historical costs, we'll have you exclude any of the non-allowable items, including food. And so hopefully that answers your question. But on attachment L, really the purpose of that was to show what a good description of your costs are. It wasn't meant or intended to convey that snacks are allowable, because they are not.
Okay, so they're still not, and then janitorial is on there as well, but that's not allowed, is that right? Even if it has to do with the health and safety?
Maintenance is not allowed on the allowable list. Maintenance is not allowed, but I wouldn't include janitorial as maintenance. I would think that health and safety and cleaning is something that is allowable.
Because I was denied that last year, but I think I may have just put it under maintenance, but it is just the cleaning that it has to happen daily that's required by childcare licensing. And so I should put that under a different word.
So maybe I'm gonna ask Emma to jump in here, and maybe we need to discuss this afterwards and put this in the Q&A, whether janitorial should be allowed or not.
Joe, I think we also need to discuss snack, because we have two current grantees in the chat saying that they have charged for snack before, and that was my understanding. Because that should be included in part of their cost per child. So I think that's something else we could discuss after and post to the Q&A, because I believe multiple grantees have charged for snack in the past.
Okay, so we will address those two issues in the Q&A.
And I think as long as, in terms of janitorial, as long as things are not being supplanted, but I think that, again, like Joe said, we need to talk about some of these things. I know that in the past, in terms of funding, we're not supposed to pay for food, that the grant funding should not be paying for food. And so in terms of historical costs, I mean, we can understand that it's included within the historical costs, and if there isn't supplanting going on, then we can chat more about it. But if that is part of your ongoing costs, then we can chat more and get back and add that to the Q&A in the future. I just know in the past, at least for becoming, we haven't, and I know in the past we haven't added on food for these grants. So it's something we need to discuss and clarify and come back, and we'll answer that in the Q&A.
Okay. Are there any other questions to this point? Okay, so the monthly cost per seat, when you input your historical costs, it can't be shorter than your traditional school year, and it can't be longer than a 12-month period. And for each category that you put on, that you have costs, include a description of what those historical expenses are. And for seats during the historical time period, if the number changed during the year, during the period, please describe how you came up with the number of seats. Some guidelines for completing historical preschool expenses: they must be actual costs that you've incurred, and they have to be adequately supported and verified by your accounting system. So it's really important that you get your finance people involved when you put this budget together, because you're going to need to submit your general ledger along with your application, and what you're asking for in your budget and as historical expenses should tie out to what's submitted as on your general ledger. Costs incurred during the period can't include specific expenses. As I said, attachment C has a list of some allowable and unallowable costs. Capital expenses such as buildings, facilities, Mortgage payments can't be allowed. Construction is also something that isn't allowed per CCDF regulations. Because this is partially federally funded, entertainment and food costs are also unallowable, as well as the purchase of vehicles and sales tax and foreign travel. I showed you briefly on the budget form where you can put additional anticipated costs. We realize that historically that might not include what you're planning to do next year, and if you do have plans for additional preschool items that aren't included in your historical costs, this would be the section of the budget where you include those. Please provide a detailed description of why the cost isn't included in your historical expenses, and consult the allowed and disallowed costs sheet when you're filling this out. And again, the additional cost budget section is on the org total tab of the proposed budget form. And make sure you also include a narrative or description of what those costs are for, what that budget is for.
Okay, Joe,
And
it looks like Shelley has her hand raised. Shelley has a question.
Okay, sorry.
So just to make sure, can we put the background checks and fingerprinting under additional costs again, as we did in the past? Sarah nodding your head.
Yeah, so if yes, you can do your fingerprinting background checks. There will be, sorry to interrupt, Joe, but there will be those additional costs, and those are included in terms of fingerprinting background checks, and then you'll also have additional costs for any additional classrooms, so kindergarten transition, PEEP administration, additional classrooms, and then professional development and trainings like conferences and things like that. So Joe, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that's good. Yeah, as long as those aren't also duplicated in your historical costs, then please include them in that section.
Thank you. You answered my question, Emma. I was going to ask what we might need to think of as other items that might be included there. But as far as PD, what can be included as additional costs for PD?
So conferences, excuse me, trainings. I think that some of those PD costs as well, and Jessica, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of them could potentially also cover the license exempt trainings that are, is that one of the reasons why we added the trainings and not the conferences?
Yeah, so what we discovered is last time when we implemented the CCDF funding, we compensated you guys for background checks and fingerprints. However, we did not compensate you for the additional salaries and benefits that came with the additional training hours required by childcare licensing. So I would say that could be an acceptable cost on your additional expenses to pay for just the portion that's required by childcare licensing, CCL. Every other PD that you offer should be incorporated in your cost per child. But if it's tied to this CCDF funding, you could add those expenses in your additional costs.
Okay,
Thanks
we've
for
got
the
another
clarification.
question. Oh, thanks. Another question from Leanne Parkinson. Janitorial supplies like COVID, misting, hand sanitizers, cleaning supplies should be included in supplies. We did not include janitorial staff salaries, but did include the cleaning supplies. I think you're correct, Leanne. And Joe, I think anything in addition to what your historical costs are, you can add those amounts in. Is that correct, Joe?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay. And then Celine is asking, under the historical program expenses section on the RFGA, it states that accounting system ledgers and supporting documents for those costs are made available upon request. Do we need to attach ledgers, or will you let us know if we need additional documentation?
Most likely, if I'm not sure if it's a requirement of the attachment. I think Jared went over that. I thought he mentioned that they were required, the general ledger.
Yeah, they are. Yes, we need to see your general ledgers, because what happens after scoring, well, the scorers will be able to, they will review your budgets and a breakdown of your budgets. And they score all of those sections, right? And so once we know what those applicants that have met the minimum threshold and are, good to go in terms of potential recommendations to the board, what happens after that then is finance reviews all of those general ledgers, and then make sure that those general ledgers match up with your cost per child. If there are any additional questions that finance have, then we set up meetings with you to ask those questions, or we reach out and send you emails. And I think a lot of you remember this from previous years, where we've had to reach out to you and get some clarification. And then what we do, once we get that clarification, then we can determine that final cost per child, and then that is what is sent through in terms of recommendation to the board. So again, we understand that there are going to be things that are not, or pieces that are not included in the general ledger that potentially you didn't account for last year, but that's something that you can say, like Leanne mentioned, there are things like hand sanitizers, spritzers that might be in last year's, but maybe there's more things this year that you've had to purchase that won't be in last year's, and you can let us know about those things. But yes, a general ledger is required. Joe, did you want to add to any of that?
Just to reiterate what you mentioned, that we will review that, and we might reach out to you and get some clarification or help understanding what it is we're looking for, or most likely reach out to your finance people to make sure we understand how your system's working.
Okay, we've got we've got some more questions. Katrina, for the Q&A on this topic, can we include nutrition staff in our allowable costs? Our teachers do not prepare meals or snacks because we have a nutrition staff that works with the charter schools staff. Can we bill all or a portion of nutrition staffing the individuals who prepare food for our preschoolers?
I think we might need to answer that in the Q&A with the snack question.
Okay. Snack and nutritional staff. Okay, and then that might also take some follow-up questions, Katrina, as well. So we'll follow up on that. Linda said this year, the 33-ish dollar fee for the background check was waived. Will that be reinstated next year? That's something I'm going to have to find out internally. I think it was waived due to COVID-19, but I will find out for you. That's a great question, Linda, and we'll add that into the Q&A. Because it's good for you to know, because if that will be waived, then you obviously would not need to add that money into your additional costs section, and could use, potential additional costs in other areas.
Last we spoke of, BCIs were going to go back in effect for providers to pay for them themselves in July of 2023. It could change, but that was the last discussion.
Oh, in 2023, okay.
I'm on
Emma,
that advisory, so don't hold me to my word, but.
But you got the scoop, Jamie.
it's recorded, Jamie.
Well, that was the last discussion.
Tassia has had her hand out.
If that's the case, then that means we would have at least another year. But again, like, because you're doing multi-year, you would have to factor that into year 2 and year 3. But I will clarify, it sounds like that might be like the date that they would just, I mean, it sounds like that's the date. I don't know, like you said, Jamie, it hasn't potentially been verified that that's going to be the date, but it sounds as though you might be able to hold off on those amounts for this year, this upcoming year, but year 2 and year 3 you would want to account for those. But I'll get a final clarification. Okay.
Okay, so there's another question, Emma. Can you clarify, do private providers get to ask for background and fingerprinting costs? Referring to the allowable costs.
Okay, so because this is waived, then I believe that if programs pick, they would cover the costs of background checks and fingerprinting, but you also have to make sure that your finger capturing is at a site that's free. That's because, so there is a list and we can send out that list. So you have to make sure that you're using a site that does not charge. When it moves back into effect, private providers would need to pay for those fingerprinting costs and background checks. I believe that they would need to pay for that. Local education agencies would still ask for that in their, or request that in their budgets, because they're license exempt and this isn't like technically it's not a requirement for them unless they're on the grant, and because it's a requirement due to CCDF receiving CCDF funding. This grant would cover those costs for local education agencies, so you would add that into your additional costs. So hopefully that helps.
I had a question.
Okay,
yes.
Cassia.
Yes. How do we include the increased salary? So we increased about $2 to $3 per hour teachers from that past year salaries. Where should we show that increased plan? And because it can be in the historical cost, should we go in the additional cost planet?
So, sorry, Joe, to interrupt.
Go ahead, Emma.
One thing that I was so in terms of salaries, the only thing that can go into additional costs for salaries are any brand new classrooms that you're opening up. So that's just all I wanted to add to that. So I think it would probably have to, I don't know if it would have to go into the historical cost per child.
Yeah, I think this is like, there was a previous question on things that have really increased in expense, and again, we're increasing your historical costs by 3.25%, but that's not going to be enough to cover all of your increases in costs, and but that's how much is available as far as funding is to increase that, and over the next 3 years, hopefully that will offset and inflation won't continue as high as it has been. But so yeah, for that specific question, include what you have been paying your teachers this last year. I would use the most recent time period, 12-month time period you can in your historical costs, and then the 3% inflation increase would offset some of the increase that you expect for next year.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
So this is Lorraine. I have a question.
Sure.
And I can't raise my hand, so well, other than this, but my things disappeared on the bottom. In the additional costs, so you showed us the second page where we list those. How does it work as far as so because this is a 3-year, potentially a 3-year grant, so sometimes we, like year 1, we might open 1 classroom. Year 2, we might open a 2nd classroom, and year 3, open another classroom. So does that account for that in there, or when we list? So we're opening a classroom this year, does that just stay in the additional costs for those 3 years? And then,
So you would list each one independently and put, there's budget area for year 1, year 2, and year 3. Let me see if I can pull that up.
I was gonna say, I see it in the narrative. On some of those things says year 1, year 2, and year 3, but I didn't notice it in the form that I guess I don't have the other form in front of me.
Quickly share that again. So yeah, on the org total sheet of the budget and additional costs, there are year 1, year 2, and year 3. So you'd put like your year 1 classroom there and fill in the amount, year 2 here and fill in the amount, or you could do it all in the same, well, I would do it on separate lines just so we know that they're 2 different classrooms, and there is a place for 3 different years of additional costs.
So in here, would we list, so if we opened a classroom this next year, under the cost description, we would say, we'll say it's classroom furniture for that class, or the teacher salaries. I'm guessing we'd write those on 2 different lines, but
Yes.
then we would put that cost in the year 1 column and put it in year 2 and put it in year 3, because we're going to sustain that over the next 3 years. And then on classroom number 2, we open 2nd year, we would just put it under year 2 and year 3. Is that how that works?
So I think I don't know. So I think what happens is you could potentially put it on different lines or put it on the same line and just say year 1, this amount for this category, year 2, right? And then what we do is you would not account for that new classroom in year 2 and year 3. What you would do is next year you would send us, so we will require some, even though you're on the grant for 3 years, we will require an updated historical costs sheet that we can look to see into those historical costs and potentially review. Or are we, Joe, do you know if we are going to be, I guess that's what the percentage upgrade is. So I don't know if you would account for that classroom year 1. We would just see that in your historical costs for the upcoming year, right? Because then if year 2, if Logan is not opening up that new, because that will be an existing classroom after year 1, right? And then year 2, if they wanted to open a new classroom, then they would add that under year 2. And then we would look at their historical costs next year from this previous year, or the following year from the previous year.
Okay, I didn't think we were gonna have historical costs again, pull them every year.
So then maybe add them in, Laureen, just maybe add them in each year, and then we can chat through, because then maybe, maybe just add them in each year.
Well, because if I don't put it in here every year and you don't pull historical, it won't, or if you do add it to historical, it's going to change your cost per seat.
Exactly.
So then you'd have to redo all of that every time.
Yeah, and then also if you don't add it into year 2 and year 3, you're not going to account for those classrooms. So, and those costs. So I would add it. I would add those costs in year 1, 2, and 3. So we don't have to go back and do that historical cost.
Okay.
Does that sound right with you?
Yeah, it does.
This is the first multi-year that we're doing. So I mean, in my mind, that makes sense so that we don't have to come back and do that historical cost. So bear with us.
Christy is asking a question about, she said, if our initial plan of adding classrooms per year is altered to unforeseen circumstances, will we revisit the budget yearly, maybe reevaluate additional costs each year? Joe, do you want to stop sharing so Chelsea can take over?
Yeah, I'm trying to.
Oh. There we go. Chelsea just took the reins.
Thank
So
you,
Emma,
Chelsea.
about the revisiting the budget yearly.
So I think that we, if there are issues, we have to deal with them as they come up. And there is always the option of amending contracts. We would have to take those budget changes to the board to get approval if there were any changes. So just know that if we're revisiting those budgets each year, that if there is a change, and we understand that things happen and that there could potentially be changes, and budgeting out for 3 years is really tough. And so I think that you do the best that you can to budget for the next 3 years, with the understanding that that's a tough thing to do, and it's hard to predict what's going to happen to year one, even year one versus like 3 years down the road. And then we can take a look if there are any issues that come up and potentially amend if there are any major issues that arise, but with the understanding that the board will have to approve any new amounts or budgets. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Yeah, I would think that we would use the historical cost that's provided this year and plan on that for the next 3 years. And then if there are any egregious things that need to be addressed or additional costs for year 2 and 3, then we would have to look at getting additional approval from the board to amend the contract.
Okay, Shauna, so this is from, let's see, Shauna asked this earlier. How many hours a day counts as part-time student slots versus full day? Okay, so this is really, I don't think there's any set number. I think I would say half day can go potentially from, 8:30 in the morning up through to lunch. So anywhere between 8:30, 9 o'clock through to noon. And then anything beyond that, where you're having nap time and lunch and outside time, and then bringing them into centers again, could be considered as full day.
We've previously, up to this point, just kind of let it be a program decision. However, there are some guidelines that we're using from NEAR for the preschool survey, so we can put those in the chat as some guidance, but it has been a program decision up to this point.
Yeah. Do you have that info that you can add into the chat, Jessica?
Yeah, we'll get that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's a great question. Okay, I think those are all the questions. If I haven't answered any, or if we haven't answered any or addressed any, please let us know.
I think we've covered this before, but there is allowed and disallowed costs for federal funding. Please refer to chapter or attachment C for that list. We've covered some of the main items that aren't allowed, such as entertainment and capital expenses, food. We are going to clarify in the Q&A regarding janitorial and snacks. Well, I think we clarified the janitorial was all right, but we will address snacks. And make sure that the budget aligns with your application and clearly outline how the expenses will be used to support the grant. And any additional anticipated costs charged to the expanded seat grant must be necessary, reasonable, and allocable to the preschool program. And as part of the application, there's also a place where you will narrate how you came up with the historical program expenses. This is a more detailed narration than is provided in the budget form itself. This is where you might include calculations or how you came up with the expenses. So when we're scoring this, we can recreate the amounts that you've put on the budget form. And the same thing with the additional anticipated costs, include a narration there describing how you came up with those amounts. And with that, unless there's further questions, I think that we're ready for another break.
There was one question that came up in the chat. Under the current enrollment snapshot in the application narrative, it asks LEAs to provide a percentage of current K through 12 grade students that are economic disadvantaged. And due to COVID funding and parents not needing to fill out the applications, our percentage is really low. How do we want to reflect this?
Emma, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, and I don't know whether Jessica and Jared wanted to chime in, just because it's explicit to local education agencies.
Well, it's just sounding like they don't have that data right now because of how COVID's been funding. So if there's a narrative that they can just put in there saying, these are the numbers we have, however, due to everyone qualifying, our data is not accurate. You could maybe reference it a year before COVID.
I
Those are
like
my
that
thoughts.
idea too. I think that it's important to, like Jessica said, to say, you know, to give that percentage for this year. And then state that it's been tough with COVID, but so we're providing some data from last year. All right, and I know even last year might even be iffy. So if you have somewhere, you know, data from previous years to demonstrate like this is how it was pre-COVID, during COVID, it's been rough to have, you know, any type of stable data. And I think that, you know, the scorers will be aware of that as long as you're addressing it, and just be sure to address it and communicate that information well. Is that helpful? Thanks, Jessica.
Yeah, I think Shelley has a question.
Hi, Shelley.
Can we do the same with preschool and use a narrative? We don't, unless we are receiving grant funding, we don't collect information from our parents in the preschool registration. We don't collect data.
For this question, are you talking about the economically disadvantaged question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's asking for K through 12.
Well, the first three questions, I believe, ask for preschool. And then the last question is K through 12. Am I correct? I think it asks for us to break it down, economically disadvantaged versus our total in preschool. And then the last question wants to know the percentage K through 12. But we don't have the information for preschool when we're not on the grant, which we are not currently. So can we do a narrative indicating that we don't collect that data from parents? Or are we going to get docked big time for that?
I think that would be okay. And then since you have been on the ground previously, maybe referencing the data that you did have.
So go back and use older data.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks.
And I think anyone that's not or has not been on this grant, that's a good question too. And you could potentially answer, you know, we have not been on this grant, so we're not currently collecting that data, but here's our plan moving forward. So I think, you know, anything with where you know potentially might not have that data due to COVID, due to not being on the grant, I think a look back would be good if you've been on the grant, and then also just a brief narrative of how you plan to move forward. I think any information that the scorers can have that to say that you've got that data and you're pulling it, or it's data from previous years, or here's my plan to move forward, rather than like, oh, we don't collect that data. It doesn't give them anything. So you will, you know, just as a heads up, you'll lose points because it doesn't give them any information. So anything that more information that you can give them, like this is our plan moving forward, even that is going to be helpful in terms of scoring, because it gives them a vision, or it provides them kind of an overview of what you plan to do. It gives them just more information.
Just to clarify, not that I would need to, but where would they put that narrative? Just write it in next to that question that you just normally put a number or a percentage? Is there a space for them to do that?
So if there's, excuse me, if there's not a way for you to add that information in, you could just potentially, and Kimber just asked me if it's okay, if this is okay, you could potentially add a number, you know, connecting it to the number of the question, and then just say you have an additional narrative. I just wouldn't make those narratives really long, just because, but just if there's not any information anywhere, you could create potentially a Word document that connects it back up to that question, and just say we have clarifying information, where we could not put additional text into a space, right? Kimber, are we okay to do that? Or
Is there, I'm just looking, so is this, I'm assuming this is on the application narrative. Is there a specific question that this is in reference to?
So it's the current enrollment snapshot, which is on page 3 of the narrative.
Okay, so let's go to that. Right here.
Correct.
Okay.
So since it's such a small, like it's a small box and we're really looking for numbers, I'm just concerned that, I mean, I think you can add, you could definitely add some text in there, but you'd have to make it so condensed that you'd have to make sure that what you're trying to get through is expressed in a really concise, clear manner. And if you need additional, if you need to add additional information, I guess my question is can they say, see attached Word document for clarification in this area?
Yeah, I think that would probably be okay. They would, the only issue with that is that they would have to send that a different way because we don't have an additional attachment on the web form for it. And so if they're not able to include it in these, you know, within the box, then it may have to be something that they email separately to that school readiness at utah.gov.
So so when you if any of you do have like an additional document, again, you don't need don't send massive narratives, but just really a concise narrative to go along with the question if you need that extra additional space. But just when you submit this, just remember to submit your additional piece to the school readiness at Utah at schoolreadiness.gov, and just state in the body of the email that this is going to go along with your application, and it needs to be considered, it needs to be scored along with the application.
All right, I would say if there's no other questions around that, we could do a quick 5-minute break unless you guys want to power through.
But we only have 20 minutes for your TNCs, so we
Yes.
probably just power through.
There was a question that came in. Could we just say pre-COVID 56% or whatever the number is? All schools are in the same boat with COVID, so everyone will have this issue, I think.
Yeah, I think you can.
I like that. And then I think as a school readiness team, we need to inform our scorers of this situation so they're aware of why they're receiving old numbers.
Yeah, and it's going to be that, I mean, we'll let them know as well. I think that's a good idea because we have to tell them that there's going to be different data that comes in. Like some programs will be providing, those that haven't been on the grant may be providing, or those that have changed curriculum from last year to this year will be providing last year's as well as this year's, and then helping them to understand as well that data is, even though we're seeing student growth, it's not potentially accurate like it would be in the other. I mean, it's accurate, but it's not like it would be in other years just because of COVID and, you know, student absenteeism and chronic absenteeism. And does everyone want, but yeah, I think that's a good idea too, is pre-COVID 56%. Perfect. Does everybody want a break, a quick break, or do you want to power through and finish up the T's and C's? I don't know if we'll get through all the T's and C's if we have a bit of a break, but
Yeah, from what I can see, it looks like people are saying to power through.
okay. All right, Kimba, you're up.
All right, let's move on. Okay, so I'm actually going to cover a couple different things, and probably just for the sake of time, I will plan on just kind of moving on from the attachments. We just kind of listed all the attachments. Chelsea, if you want to go to the next slide, just so you're aware of everything that's included in your RFG packet. What I did want to spend just a couple minutes on is the next slide, which are the appendices. So these are going to be the specific documents provided by DWS. So Samantha went over the additional documentation that each applicant has to provide and attach to that, attached to the web form. So if you go to the next slide, Chelsea, it has the appendices included. And so I just wanted to take a couple minutes and just make sure you kind of understand how these work. If you click on that web form link right there, Chelsea, if you don't mind doing that, just one thing I want to make note of, and I know this was pulled up earlier, in order for you to be able to start filling out the web form, because it does come through Adobe, you have to click continue, and then there's kind of a start button that kind of helps you start where the last place that you had typed in an answer. And so just make sure you can kind of tab through those if you want. This document is designed to kind of be started and finished at the same time. So it is something you can pull up, look at. It's not a savable document, so it's through Adobe Sign. It's not like a fillable PDF that you can download and save to your desktop. So just know once you start this, make sure you have all your documents prepared and ready to be attached, because from start to finish, it has to be done in one sitting. And then once you're done filling out all of the required elements and attaching your documents, that's when you will see the button kind of at the bottom. It's a blue button that will say submit. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then one of the things that's going to be attached to this, as far as the appendices that we are including, that we have included in the documents that we've emailed to all of the second phase applicants, is the application narrative. And we've kind of been looking at that a little bit. I just wanted to make note that that is a fillable PDF. So you can, you know, from that email, you can download that, you can save it, you can work on it, save it, come back to it. You know, it doesn't have to be done in one sitting. Just know that you want to make sure it's thoroughly completed before you attach it and submit your web form.
Thank you for making it savable.
Yeah, you bet. The teacher's credential spreadsheet is an Excel spreadsheet. So same thing, when that was emailed to you, you can download it, you can save it. And then, you know, as you're working on it, you can come back to it if you need to. Same kind of thing. Once you're ready to attach that to your web form, just make sure, our biggest thing is making sure that that spreadsheet is uploaded in its original format. So just make sure, like sometimes if you're working on a map, it kind of goes to like a different format. So just make sure you're putting it in Excel spreadsheet before you attach it to the web form. And then Appendix 4 is the 3-year proposed budget form. So that's also going to be that Excel spreadsheet that Joe has been going over with you. So just make sure that you are providing that in its original format prior to attaching it and submitting your web form. That's also savable and something that you can kind of go back to and work on if you need to get numbers and things like that. So, and then the last one is also going to be a fillable PDF. So that is our FADA certification. That's basically just for federal reporting of funds. And so that one is also something that you can download and save. Just make sure on that you are indicating, there's kind of 2 little boxes on the side that say yes or no. And so just make sure that you're checking one of those. If you do answer yes, you do have to then kind of fill out kind of the additional information regarding the like executive compensation information. So like name, title, and then the total compensation level. If you say no, just make sure that you're scrolling to the bottom and then there's a signature, a date, and then the name and title of the person that that information is provided for. So those will be the documents that are provided, that were provided in the email that was sent to you. So just make sure that you're kind of keeping track of those. And then once you're ready to include them in your web form, you attach all of those. And then let's go on to the next one, because I think we'll probably start talking about these terms and conditions. And so kind of as noted in kind of the first part of this meeting, there definitely are some terms and conditions that we want to make sure that you're abiding by, in addition to the performance requirements, which is attachment A is always going to be those terms and conditions. And we've included kind of the general terms and conditions for the RFGA. Just note that if you are like a school district or what we consider like a state agency or component unit, that you may see kind of a different or separate terms and conditions if you are awarded a contract. So just make note that those might be a little different, but the information is essentially the same. And so if you want to go to the next slide, I'm just going to kind of cover a couple of important points to note. Couple of the biggest ones are what we call the conflict of interest and also related parties. So you'll see these on the next couple slides. So conflict of interest is just basically making sure that if you are awarded these grant funds, we don't want to have anybody who's also employed by DWS receiving money under the grant funds. So we definitely want to make sure that there's no conflict of interest with those fundings and how they're being spent. Similar situation, which kind of details on the next slide, which is related parties. So basically just making sure, again, that if you have somebody that you're related to that's going to be working directly under these grant funds, we do need to be notified of that. And so we just want to make sure that these funds are being spent appropriately. So just making sure there is a related parties approval request that you can submit for that we will review to make that determination if it is something that we are able to do. So just make sure that you're doing that. And it kind of does detail as far as like, if you're asking the question like, well, who's a related party? I mean, it could be as broad as like an in-law, so you're not necessarily related by blood, but you are married to someone who's also related to your spouse. And it could be, you know, as close as your spouse. It could be a parent, it could be a child that you're related to. It also goes as far as like first cousins, nieces and nephews. So if you have anybody who you're related to that's going to be working with you under this grant, just make sure that you're putting in that related parties approval request. And then as far as, I think the next slide is kind of a continuation of that, Chelsea, so you can move on to the next one. Let's talk which talks about our monitoring procedures. So basically there's some details in like specifically the performance requirements and different parts of the grant that kind of talk about your monitoring as far as like site visits, desk audits, third-party monitoring, expenditure documents review. So anything related to funds that are being spent under the grant, performance requirements, like quarterly reports that are required, things like that. We just want to make sure that you're following those monitoring requirements. And just making sure you're staying in compliance. Our biggest thing is we want to make sure that you're successful in receiving these grant funds. We want to be able to assist you like through those monitoring periods with making sure that you're staying in the compliance so you can continue to receive these funds. If you want to go to the next slide, Chelsea, I'll talk a little bit about, so if for some reason, you know, during a monitoring, we come across something that maybe you're missing, or there's funding information that we need more documentation on, or we find out maybe there's something going on that you're out of compliance in, we definitely are going to give you some time to work on those things and get back into compliance and do the things that you need to do. If for some reason there comes a time where we do have to terminate a contract, there are a couple different reasons why that might happen. So again, you know, if it's a for cause, it could be, you know, we've given you some time, we've provided written notice of what you're out of compliance on. If you're missing something and we're asking you for that and we've never gotten a response from you, then we would do a written notice of termination, a for cause termination. If for some reason we're not able to kind of come to a resolution of that, then we typically will send notice that termination is happening. That typically is within like a 30-day time period. There are some things that cause us to have to do immediate termination, where basically, you know, if you're out of a childcare licensing requirement or something that causes us to have to terminate that contract immediately, we will still notify you, but it will be something that is immediate. We typically don't give you time to correct the action. So we just want to make sure you're aware of that. And then there are times where we come across what we call no cause termination, where you come to us and say, you know, within our program, we're able to sustain without these funds. We no longer need them. And so we just kind of work together to end the contract at a date that works for you. So that could be one of the reasons as well. The next slide just kind of talks a little bit about non-appropriation of funds or reduction of funds. So also just be aware that there are times, for example, like if we're not receiving the budget or funding information that we need in order to, you know, reimburse you, or if there's kind of fraudulent situations, just making sure you're aware that that could also be a reason for for your invoices to not be paid, or if it is a fraudulent situation where we could be terminating your contract as well. All right, and then let's go to, that's part one. Let's get through part two. Just for sake of time, and we'll just kind of talk about if you disagree with any determination that's been made. On the next slide, it talks a little bit about our code of conduct and then also grievance procedure. And so we do want to make sure that you are given, you know, a way to kind of file a grievance if you disagree. And so there is a way to do that. The code of conduct just basically is something that is included in your grant packet. And if you are awarded a contract, that code of conduct is required to be signed and filed. And it would be for those who are currently under the current grant. So I hope that answers your question, Shelley, as far as the use of the code of conduct, non-disclosure, and then any background checks are done. They do have to be current. So again, if you have those from previous years, just make sure you're getting them re-signed, updated, and then kept on file, because those things are looked at. If it is something that like Emma would want to look at during the monitoring or something, So you're just wanting to make sure that you're keeping those things on file.
So you're saying get new for everybody? Is that right?
Get new ones.
Get
Yeah.
new. Okay. I thought in years past we were allowed to use previous years.
Yeah, we want to make sure that they're updated based on the term of the grant. So like, for example, for this one, since it's a multi-year grant, you know, if you're getting a 2-year grant, you can use that one for 2 years. If it's 3 years, you can use the one that was signed once the contract was executed for those 3 years, but you do want to make sure that you have updated ones for the current grant that you're receiving. So that was a good question to ask. And then as far as keeping things kind of on file, the next slide just kind of talks about records administration. So as far as any documents, things that are retained under the grant that you're receiving, and again, you know, that could mean for 2 years or 3 years. And this is just for auditing purposes, just make sure that you're keeping those things on file for at least 6 years. Just making sure that if there is an audit that comes through, that you have those documents. And that could mean like a tangible file folder that you're keeping those stored and secured, or by a virtual secure file that you're keeping those stored securely on a computer somewhere. I'm not going to get into the required insurance too much. Just make note that I did highlight for the insurance policies, just making sure, and it's on the next slide, Chelsea, that the per person occurrence must be set at $1 million and the aggregate per occurrence is 3 million. So that, in addition to kind of what Samantha mentioned, just making sure that you're noting DWS is the additionally insured in those boxes is the requirement. You can skip the next slide because it just kind of talks more in detail about the required insurance. As far as billing and payments go, and I know Joe talked a lot about the requirements for billing. Just one thing that I wanted to make note of that's in the terms and conditions is because our closeout gets so busy, and we know you are all busy too, kind of getting things done at the end of the year. We want to make sure that any billing for services for the month of June are received no later than July 15th. And that's just to help with making sure that you get paid those reimbursements during our fiscal year closeout, just because it is a busy time. And then I did kind of mention this, but just to reiterate, if for some reason there's any questions from finance or we don't get everything that we need for being able to re-invoice from your invoices, it could mean a withholding of payment until we get what we need or until we resolve any of those issues. And so that's just kind of mentioned on the next slide, talking about just making sure we resolve any of those issues in order to release that payment to you. So I know that we went very quickly through those, but just make note that those are in your packets, and they, you know, a specific terms and conditions will be included if you are awarded a grant in your contract. And so if you have additional questions about those, feel free to reach out as well.
I'm impressed. I didn't think we could do it, Kimber. Good job.
There was one question in the chat. I don't know if that was already answered about repairs to their building. If they're not adding those on the expense sheets, would like to make that into a goal. Is that an acceptable goal?
Emma, do you want to speak to that, or?
Yeah, okay, so it says, is this the one from Julie, Paul?
Yeah, I just kind of summarized it, but yeah.
Okay, so some of our goals are structural, like fixing the roof for health and safety, and redoing the backyard and adding more skills. We're not adding those expenses to our expense sheet, but we would like to make that into a goal. Is that an acceptable goal? Are you referring to just in terms of quality?
Well, we have 9 goals that we need to make, and so we're doing those. We would like to make those into goals so that we can do them as goals. Is that okay?
I think as long as they relate back to the grant and the definition of when we say goal, as long as it ties back into what we're asking for goals.
Well, and it wasn't very specific. That's why I was wondering, because it didn't say like specific to, like it does improve health and safety with our roof being leaking. We want to switch out the carpet and linoleum. We have an ant problem. Like we want to just make some general improvements like that, but we have 9 goals to make. So we just thought we could include those as well with some of our other program goals, since we're working on those as well. Is that okay?
Kimber, can you pull up those goals really quickly, just so that we can just all take a look at them?
And we did set some of our goals. I know some people ask these questions. We already set our goals. I just want to make sure we're not going to get dinged from them. But we set goals like we want to improve our family involvement, but each year we want to progressively get better and better for 3 years. So we did make a 3-year goal for that to evaluate and our evaluation process so that we could get feedback and then we could get better. So we did make 3 goals based on 1 idea, and that was for increased parent involvement, stuff like that.
I think that's great. I think as long as it comes back to your organization proposal goals and that they meet those SMART goals. So they're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and timely. And the relevant and timely piece is that the nice thing about that is if you have one goal that you're thinking about, okay, this is going to take 3 years, and how can we break that down into 3 years? I think that you can, that fits the timely piece really well too, that you can focus on those things and give it time. And then, you can look at attachment P for application examples for reference, but I think, if that's your program-wide goal, I think as long as it's going back to quality, and I think that does, because, if you're looking at health and safety, if it's including those things, I think that it is applicable.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and then, I think Jessica answered this one. I think there was a question about whether you could take the code of conduct forms and whether they could be scanned from teachers, or do they need the original forms, Kimber?
I think what I would say, well, I guess Kimber can go ahead and answer. My thought would be that they can have the physical copies at the teacher's classroom, and as long as they have an electronic version for us to view during monitoring, I would be okay with that. You guys saw Kimber nodding, so we're good.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't get it to unmute myself, but yeah, so as long as you have, if there's a monitoring that's happening and like, for example, if it's like a desk, not a in-person, and you're able to pull those up and show them, that's totally fine.
Any other questions that you have? And I know that as you go through the RFGA and start to complete the application and pull your supporting documents together, you'll have more questions. And we're here to help you out with those, and just send them to schoolreadiness@utah.gov. If you feel like it's a question that, you can all CC, Jared and Jessica into this, and Samantha, if you'd like, CC Kimber, just so that if you think that there is a question that might need to involve everyone, and if the question just comes into school readiness and I feel like I need to get Jessica and Jared's advice, we always do that, so we pull each other in. But just be sure that those questions are coming into school readiness, because we shouldn't individually be responding to you in our personal accounts. They need to be coming through school readiness in order for us to put all of the Q&As into the document, as well as just making it fair. So if you're reaching out directly to a program specialist at this point, because it's an open solicitation, you should not be doing that. So please send it to schoolreadiness@utah.gov. And if you want to include the people in, just CC those people into the question. Yeah, and we will be providing the recording, so we'll send that along to you.
And we're also added the Google form that they can submit questions on in the chat. So if you guys want to bookmark that, and then you can just submit them there.
Well, I think we're good. I think we're done. We're only 5
Yeah,
minutes
I was
over.
gonna say, go have lunch, take a walk. It's a nice
Yes.
day outside. Thanks for being here, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.